How do I talk about one of my favorite movies of all time in a way that hasn't really been done before? I guess give you my spin on it. This one's probably going to be a bit of a long one, but tuck in. This is going to be cool. I think. I hope. Let's talk about Blade Runner. So the point of this video really is to get across basically my love for Blade Runner and hopefully maybe inspire you to watch it again or maybe for the first time. So I will say though, this video will probably contain some spoilers, but nothing that's going to be so bad that you're going to go, well, that just completely ruined it for me. Trust me, the movie's worth watching. If you don't know what this movie's about, really quick, it's basically about a bounty hunter that is on the lookout for some renegade androids that go crazy in Los Angeles in 2019. So of course that is the future from 1982, but basically just forget about 2019 for a second and just think about this is in the future, right? This is a futuristic kind of thing, and what it is it's definitely futuristic, but it's got this very noir kind of feel to it. And it's part of the reason why the movie is so popular. I mean, it became like this sort of template for, if there was going to be a futuristic movie coming out, they were saying, well, like Blade Runner. And it became this cyberpunk standard, right? Everybody wanted their movie to look like Blade Runner, and it continues to this day. I can't believe that this movie is 40 years old. It came out on June 25th, 1982, to not a lot of fanfare. A lot of people did not like this movie, or at least were thrown off, because Harrison Ford was doing pretty much nothing but heroic type roles. Of course, Han Solo, Indiana Jones. So this movie was a bit of a weird one. It didn't quite find its audience when it was in theaters in 1982. But over the years, it sort of gained this cult following. In the early 90s, a work print surfaced, and this probably was one of the versions of the film that was screened to people to try to gauge the reactions of the audience. The studio does this from time to time. You hear of test screenings all the time. This was an early cut, and this early cut included things and took away things from the original theatrical release of this movie. First, they completely got rid of the Harrison Ford narration that was put in there by the studios because in test screenings, people said that the movie was kind of hard to follow. So the studios brought Harrison Ford in to do this narration, sort of a noir kind of narration, hard-boiled kind of detective kind of narration. The problem is, you can tell Harrison Ford is not into it. He hates it. In fact, everybody on board, the actual cast and crew, they don't like the narration. Some people like it, some people think it adds a little flavor to it. But for me personally, I don't like the narration either. But anyway, this work print came out and started making the rounds in theaters. And, they would do midnight screenings and stuff like that. And what happened is the people that were big fans of Blade Runner noticed that this is a different cut. There's no narration. There's an extra scene that looks like a lot of people kind of thought, is this footage from Legend? The movie with unicorns and such? Because there's a unicorn scene in the middle of the movie. And a lot of people started to try to figure out, okay, well, what is this cut? It was so successful in the fan community that Warner Brothers took notice. And in 1997, they decided to do a director's cut. Now, Ridley Scott was too busy to actually sit down and recut the movie and put in the things that he wanted and things like that. The studio talked with Ridley, and he kind of gave them some things to basically put back in the movie and change. And one of the things was this unicorn scene. And so the work print led to the cut of the movie called the director's cut, even though he didn't really have a whole lot to do with it. But that's what came out in 1997. And this, of course, came out on DVD too, the brand new format at the time. And I think it's on DVD where Blade Runner really kind of got its footing as a cult classic. Now, 10 years later, for the 25th anniversary, they went ahead and did this 5-disc set, and it's got the final cut on here, and it's a brand new recut Blade Runner with some extra things in it, like some changes and some recuts and things like that. One of them is a scene in particular when he's talking to a vendor that sells, I guess, android animals. He's talking with this gentleman, and his voice does not match what he's saying, and it's really kind of distracting the first time you see it. You're like, why doesn't this match? Well, instead of going to Harrison Ford, which apparently he was busy at the time, they went to Harrison Ford's son, and they filmed him in the exact angle and everything, and his son did the actual, they shot this part of his face and they put that on Harrison Ford's performance, and that was really cool. Another one that was really kind of like, wow, that was a big one, and it's kind of a welcome change. There's a scene with Joanna Cassidy. Her character of Zora is being chased by Harrison Ford. And again, not going to tell you exactly what goes down, but there is a stunt person in the scene, and it's very obvious that this is not Joanna Cassidy. I mean, just it's very awkward, especially in HD. It looks like, okay, that was, yeah. But at the time, that's what they did. Well, Joanna Cassidy has remained in shape and still a gorgeous woman, even 25 years later. So they got her in the studio and shot footage of her and put her face on the stunt person. And I think it's a really, really welcome change. Now, recently, the company Zavi, which is or Zavi, I don't know how you actually say it, Zavi. Anyway, they're a specialty, kind of a boutique Blu-ray manufacturer. They came out with this new thing called Film Vault. And this is almost like, in a lot of ways, kind of like the Criterion Collection, where it's films that they feel are important. And they do these big special editions of them. And I got it. It just came out, and it's Blade Runner, the final cut on 4K. And this is not, they are numbered, but this is not the first one. It's the first in the Film Vault series, basically. So number 1. But yeah, it's an interesting set. This is already sold out. Unfortunately, it is. It's just one of those things. It is numbered, and there was a limited edition of 3,000 made for this. But yeah, it's actually going for 2 or 3 times its price on eBay now. But you open it up, and it's got this beautiful artwork. It's got Harrison Ford on the back. This magnetic flap opens up, and you've got Roy Batty's speech here on the inside. And you've got this section here, and you pull this up, and inside you've got the plaque that shows the numbered edition, and here are the discs here, and in here we've got this, and this is basically got some cool things in it. It's got these glossy cards that show artwork on the back, and some basically the storyboards and things like that. Some pictures from the movie. It's pretty cool. And then you get this fold out blueprint of the spinner, the vehicle that the police use, which is pretty sweet. It's a bit hard to focus on this, but yeah, you can see the little plaque that you get, number 554 of 3,000. And yeah, that's a pretty cool little thing to include. Then in here you get the actual discs. And in here you've got Harrison Ford on one side, Rutger Hauer on the other. And on the inside, it looks like this. And when you open it up, you've got your 4K on the left and your Blu-ray, your Region 2 Blu-ray, by the way, on the right. And yeah, that's the introduction to the movie there. And yeah, it's a pretty cool looking set. Now, if you ask me, special edition sets like this, they are cool for sure. But the problem is there's not a whole lot included on the discs themselves. This is basically a copy of the 4K disc that Warner Brothers released, and it's got the 4K version of the film, an introduction by Ridley Scott saying, hey, this is my preferred cut of the film, I hope you enjoy it, and then you get 3 commentaries, and you get a little, almost like a trailer for the 4K disc. So it's kind of like, where's all the extra stuff? The other thing too is when you put this on the shelf, you can see it's pretty large. I mean, there's a standard Blu-ray right next to it. It's quite large, so it's definitely a showpiece. Now, the first time that I saw Blade Runner was around 1997, 1998. So the first version that I saw was the director's cut. And it was yeah, I watched it and was like, okay, I mean, I get it. I understand. It's a very, very beautiful looking movie. And I understand that it's historical significance. It's very influential as a movie, design and all that kind of stuff. But the movie it just didn't grab me. And it wasn't until 2007 when I saw this that I really started to understand and fell in love with the movie. The first disc on here is the final cut. So I watched the final cut for the first time and was like, wow, this is really like the actual meaning of the movie changes, in my opinion. And it started to really get me intrigued. And then on each, following disc, you get a lot of different stuff. On disc 2, you get Dangerous Days by Charles de Lauzirika. Always have trouble saying his name, but I'm telling you, if you're a fan of making of features, documentaries, Dangerous Days is the gold standard. There's no better documentary, period, at least for making of movies, than Dangerous Days for me. And it really got me to understand a lot of the thinking from Ridley Scott, from Harrison Ford. You get all the major players, the cast and crew, everybody is involved here. The screenwriters are really important as well. But on disc 3, you get the theatrical cut, the original cut that I'd never seen before, with the commentary, the narration by Harrison Ford that he really didn't like. I got to see that for the first time on here. And then the international theatrical cut, which really just added some extra violence. There wasn't really a big difference in the two cuts. And then the director's cut, which I watched again. Disc 4 has plenty of other featurettes and things like that, just, making of the movie. Very, very cool stuff. But disc 5 is where things got really interesting. And that's the work print. With the work print, I got to see basically Ridley Scott's thinking. And the more that you kind of take in, especially the commentaries are great too. But with the work print, you really get to see what Ridley Scott's original, I guess, idea of what this movie was really came into focus. I mean, the movie is about, what does it mean to be human? Really. I mean, I think that's the main theme of it. But it gets even more interesting, just thematically with Ridley Scott's work print, and then, of course, with the final cut as well. All of the different cuts, it teaches you so much about filmmaking and how different things can shift around, things can be taken out, and it can completely change your view of the movie. And what I did is, when I got this, I watched each and every possible feature that I could watch on here. All the commentaries, I watched them disc by disc, and it was really seriously like a film school. It made me appreciate Ridley Scott as a filmmaker even more. It's probably what, made me think that he might be the best, in my opinion, for me. I know there's a lot of people say Steven Spielberg, or, there's plenty of directors out there that are amazing. But for me, Ridley Scott was always my favorite after this. To me, there's no better special edition set, as far as a complete feeling of just, I feel like I know so much now about the making of the movie than this. If you can find this still, I would recommend picking it up. Now, if you want to go further down the rabbit hole, I got something for you. There's this. Paul M. Salmon put this out a long time ago, but then he updated it before 2049 came out. And this, I learned so much about this. It's a thick book, but I'll tell you, I learned so much. I learned so much about everything. And I thought, man, I don't know if I really want to dig into this far, all the stuff that he got from, like I said, members of the cast, members of the crew. It's awesome. And it's one of those stories that it almost eclipses the movie. The making of Blade Runner, all of the problems, the tribulations, all of the things that happened with that movie. It's just amazing stuff. And if you're a big fan of Blade Runner and you want more, this is what you should get. Over the last, I would say, 6 months, 9 months or so, I've been compiling things that I found out about Blade Runner through reading the books, through watching the documentaries. And I want to share some with you, just a couple. And I think I don't know. I didn't know a lot of this stuff, and it was really, really cool to find out. Everybody was very critical of Ridley Scott's perfection when it came to the shoot. In fact, Harrison Ford was very, very unhappy with Ridley Scott. They butted heads quite a bit. And these were long, arduous shoots. Very, very long, and mostly at night. which makes things even worse. When you're shooting at night, things just tend to, man, nights shooting are a beast. I'll just say that. And some days finished with only 2 setups done for the day, which is crazy to think about. Now, when I say setup, that means usually, like, say, a lot of times you'll have a scene where 2 people are talking, right? One person's in focus, and then, you kind of see the person out of focus, right? And then it switches, right? And each one of those is called a setup. So on some days, they only got 2 setups done in a day. That makes for a very frustrating shoot for a lot of people, I would imagine. Now, this is something that I learned actually pretty recently. At the beginning of Blade Runner 2049, you see Ryan Gosling's character come in and see and meet with and have a fight with Dave Bautista's character in Blade Runner 2049. That whole introduction was how Ridley Scott originally thought that he wanted to introduce the character of Deckard in the first Blade Runner. So it's really interesting that whole idea that he had about him kind of coming to this place, meeting with this guy, and then them having a fight, all of that was taken from Ridley Scott's original idea for the beginning of Blade Runner. Now, I think a lot of people might know this next part, but I just found it really, really interesting that Rutger Hauer is who wrote Roy Batty's final speech at the end of the film. That during the cast read-through, Rutger was like, "Hey, Ridley, I've got this idea." And Ridley was like, "Okay, go ahead." And Rutger gave this speech, and everybody was just kind of floored. And yeah, I just think that's really, really cool. And it also shows that when you're making a film, sometimes the best ideas come from all sorts of places. When an actor gets in a character's head, sometimes they might have a really, really good idea. So it's smart to listen to them. This one I had no idea about. I had no idea that of all the actors that were going to, read for Deckard and were almost Deckard, that the one that was the closest, other than Harrison Ford, was Dustin Hoffman. I honestly can't imagine Dustin Hoffman in this role at all. But I'm sure in a lot of cases, you'd probably say the same thing about Harrison Ford. I mean, especially with the run of movies that he had. I just think that alternate version out there, that alternate universe where Dustin Hoffman got the part, I kind of want to see that version of the movie. Speaking of actors that come up with some really, really good ideas, Edward James Olmos is the one that came up with his own version, his own language, basically, of what city speak is. So it's a mixture of all the different languages. That's the whole thing, right? There's Asian culture influence. There's of course Latino culture in there, and there's English, and that's why the character of Gaff, played by Edward James Olmos, kind of speaks all over the place. And yeah, really, really interesting stuff that he's the one that came up with it. Very, very cool. Now, this one's a pretty big spoiler, okay? This happens toward the end of the film. But when Roy Batty goes to visit Tyrell, there's the whole, I want more life, all that kind of thing. And then he actually kills Tyrell. In the original version of the script, when he kills Tyrell, he realizes that he's an android. I mean, I'm not sure if like gears and stuff were coming out of, whatever. But it was supposed to be very, very obvious that this is not a human being. And Roy Batty goes up a floor and finds the sarcophagus of the real human Tyrell dead for 4 years. I don't know how that would have played, but it's a really, really interesting thought. And it kind of toys with the defeatist attitude more than the time limit of their lifespan, I guess, the androids. But I just think it's a cool idea, and I kind of wish we saw that. For me, there's really just 2 things that I kind of wish were different about the movie. Number one, the scene, the kissing scene between Deckard and Rachel, it feels awkward and a little uncomfortable. I'm just gonna say that. In fact, it's Deckard pretty much forces himself on Rachel, and it didn't age well. Okay, it just doesn't. Okay, but then the other thing is all this talk about androids and the Tyrell Corporation, and the motto, more human than human, all of these things, and yet we don't see any other androids in the film other than the bad ones. You don't see just regular androids kind of going about their life. It's one of those things where, especially, looking back over the years, it's kind of like, why didn't they have any other androids, that Deckard may have come across? Ones that were not malfunctioning, ones that were not, murdering people and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Just normal androids going about their business. I think that would have been cool to see. I think the legacy of this film is really important. It's not just about the look of the film, the set design, everything that this movie influenced future directors and future movies. You can see Blade Runner in so many different ways in so many different movies, but I think the most important thing is this debate whether or not Deckard is a replicant. And I think it's just an interesting conversation to have. And it really depends upon which version of the movie that you saw. Because originally, the theatrical cut, the international cut, both of those, it's kind of not even much of a question. I don't think a lot of people even would have even thought that Deckard was a replicant. Because, he picks up at least my interpretation of the movie, he picks up the unicorn from Gaff, right? Gaff has been leaving these little paper figurines or whatever all throughout the movie, sort of telling Harrison Ford what he's thinking. He's like, "Oh, you're a chicken. Oh, you've got the hots for Rachel." All these kinds of things that he's been leaving throughout the film, and the idea of him picking up a unicorn to me meant this is a fantasy. This is a fantasy, and you're living in a dream world, basically. There's no way that things are going to work out. And he just kind of looks and nods and then goes in the elevator, credits roll. And I love that. It leaves it very, very open as to what's going to happen next. And that's awesome. But then with the work print and then eventually the final cut, these movies include the interlude in the middle of the movie of Harrison Ford dreaming about a unicorn. And that draws everything into question. Because if he's thinking of a unicorn and then the figurine at the end is Gaff basically saying, "I know that you're a replicant too," that draws everything into question. And of course, from Ridley's point of view, that's what he intended. He intended for people to think that Deckard was a replicant. And that's part of the fun of the movie. Rutger Hauer and Harrison Ford both said that they did not like the idea of Deckard being a replicant because a lot of the movie is the difference between what does it mean to be human and this final battle between Harrison Ford and Rutger Hauer on, throughout this, this apartment complex and everything, all of that fighting. It's really the man versus machine. And that's kind of, at least from their point of view, that was the theme of the movie. So it's really, really interesting thing, and in fact, I think Ridley says that it's pretty obvious, when you see my final cut, what I think. And that's the way it is. There's also a little scene. It's a very, very quick shot. A lot of people miss it. I missed it plenty of times. I had to have it pointed out to me. But it's when Rachel is talking with Harrison Ford after the Zora incident, all of that. Harrison Ford's getting himself cleaned up, and he walks behind her and looks back, and he's got the same glow in his eyes as Rachel had, as all of the androids in the film. That's one of the ways that you can, it's just a visual thing as to how you can tell who's an android and who isn't, is because the androids have that little golden glow in their eyes, which is basically just done with an offset lighting, which I think is kind of cool. But yeah, so Ridley intended for this to be a thing that people thought about. Does it work? Is it fun? Yeah, it's really fun. It's fun to debate it. And to me, my definitive version of the film would be to take that unicorn footage out. That unicorn footage needs to go out. And because I love the idea that you can look at that ending scene as Gaff basically telling Deckard, "Hey, I know you're a replicant and I know you're on the run." Basically saying, "I'm not going after you, but good luck." And Ridley. And Harrison Ford, his character, he nods, goes into the elevator, and that's it. if you don't have that unicorn scene in the movie, it's more of, it leaves things open-ended, and it leaves the idea that maybe Gaff is just saying, hey, I know you're on the run, but I'm not coming after you. Good luck. And I kind of like that. I kind of like that a little bit more. And I like the idea that it's all up in the air. And I love that Denis Villeneuve doesn't really go into it at all. And no matter what you think about whether you think Harrison Ford's a replicant or he's not a replicant, doesn't matter. Blade Runner 2049 still works beautifully. Either way. I mean, he's either a regular human, or he's a replicant that doesn't have any sort of time limit. And that's awesome. That's awesome that he was able to do that in such a way that it really didn't matter what you thought, and it still works. Wow, that was a long video. I've been recording for 47 minutes. Of course, it'll be shorter than that, hopefully, by the time I edit this down. But yeah, I love Blade Runner. I do. Unabashedly, it's one of my favorites. It's not perfect, but it's one of my favorite movies, not just for the movie itself, but for everything I've learned about the movie, everything I've learned from Ridley Scott. It's like I said, it's been like my own little film school, and I love it. I love it for that, and I love Ridley for that. So let me know down below what you think of Blade Runner. Got any other little tidbits, things that I didn't mention, things that you know about the movie that maybe I don't? Leave them down in the comment section. We'll talk about it. Let me know your thoughts. All the things, right? Because that's what's fun about YouTube in the comment section, is we get to talk to each other, and I love it. So anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.